Security, the President of the General Assembly, and our Global Crisis Response Group for joining forces at this critical moment. Our world faces a host of challenges: climate change, COVID-19, conflicts, and rising inflation. Against this backdrop, food, energy, and fertilizer prices are skyrocketing, aggravated by the war in Ukraine. Taken together, this is a recipe for economic hardship, social turmoil, and record levels of hunger.
Well, in a surprise move Wednesday, the Senate reached a deal on a historic climate, health care, and tax proposal, but it comes with a name change, as they said the proposal is designed to fight inflation. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia changed his stance on the extensive proposal, striking a deal with fellow Democrats in the Senate. It's not being called Build Back Better, but instead Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The proposal includes billions in new spending, including nearly $370 billion in energy security and climate change programs over a decade. It also includes $20 billion to support climate-smart ag practices and a sustainable aviation fuel tax credit. The deal still needs to secure support in the House. We have all the details about the proposal on agweb.com. USDA says food at home prices, or what you pay at the grocery store, those prices are projected to increase between 10 and 11% this year, with meats and dairy expected to jump more than that. Next year, though, food at home prices should only increase between 2 and 3%, according to USDA's latest forecast.
I warned people, I said, once this administration gets their hands on power, they're going to really push this climate change proposal and new bills coming into America.
This bill would be the most significant legislation in history to tackle the climate crisis.
So I think livestock industry in general is feeling the heat. We have higher feed prices, we have more regulations. And, Americans are kind of feeding into this lie that climate change is because of agriculture, and climate change is not going to get better until farmers and ranchers do better. They're scaring us into saying, oh, we're not going to have enough food by 2050. We're continuing, to grow our population. It comes to a point where you say, well, if you continue to kill off our food supply and our American farmers, yeah, we're not going to have enough food. But if we sustain it and we protect it and we practice safe practices for, agriculture, then we can get there. But they continue to want to push a state tax on us and let the EPA know all of our information, and they continue to blame climate change on agriculture.
Cargo containers started moving again at the Port of Oakland this week. Independent truck drivers protesting a new state law had nearly shut down business operations there for almost a week. But considering nearly 66% of beef exports to Japan go through that port and 70% of pork exports to Japan, it could take a while to chew through that backlog.
If you look at the overall impact on the ag commodity groups, everything from fruit and produce to meat and everything in between, and all the associated industries that go with that, the economic impact of this situation in Oakland going on for any length of time is just monumental. So all the more reason that we need to push the state of California and the appropriate parties to get this resolved as soon as possible.
One thing I want folks to also remember is that coming up on that August 12th USDA report, the USDA has the ability to change and tweak the acre numbers for planted acres. It's not something that they normally do, but because it was a late planted spring, they're going to be able to do that on this upcoming report. So my thought is that we see acre numbers adjusted, we see the yield adjusted. It might come down a little bit, but usually when we see that type of activity, all of a sudden demand starts to go away, and that offsets a potentially smaller crop. So at the end of the day, I don't know that ending stocks are going to get a lot smaller because there can be that demand adjustment, but seasonally take note that oftentimes starting at the beginning of August for 2 to 3 weeks, November soybean futures and December corn futures do have a tendency to work a little bit lower till we get into that harvest low.
Well, again, as Naomi said, we were oversold to begin with, and then you start looking at this bean situation as a whole. Obviously, old crop carryout is just tight. New crop carryout's pretty darn tight. You didn't get the acreage that you wanted to get this year, and then the bean crop went in the ground late. So You throw all those things together and basically you're hoping and praying for a really good August weather pattern. A lot of folks, I think, have indicated to us that the corn crop looks better, relatively speaking, than the bean crop. And that is pretty much across the board that we've heard that. And so, you come in here and you get 100 to 110 plus temperatures over the next couple of weeks. The first 10 days of August are predicted to be brutal. And I've got to think that that really calls into question whether we can even hit a 50 bushel crop on a national basis, let alone 51.5. You start talking about a sub 50 crop, and that's certainly potentially in the cards. That gets you in an extremely tight situation.
This is going to leave a scar, going to leave a mark that guys are going to remember forever.
An aerial snapshot of Hale County, Texas tells the story best.
Most of our area right now is in a D4 drought, the highest level that the drought monitor actually measures.
Todd Straley manages Quarterway Gin in Plainview, Texas, an area that's known for cotton.
We expected at the beginning of the season, with the acres that I had planted reported to me, we should have been ginning somewhere just slightly over 100,000 bales this year. What it looks like today is we're going to be somewhere between 15 and 20,000.
The last time the crop looked this poor was the devastating drought of 2011, and this year the crop is worse.
Extreme heat and dryness are continuing to pressure crops out in the field right now. One place that is evident is Nebraska, where crop conditions in the state dropped 3% for both corn and soybeans last week. So how much is that hurting the crop and production potential? Ag Day's Michelle Rook headed to the fields to find out.
The crop is holding on here in Nebraska, but farmers tell me that with another week of hot, dry weather, yields will be severely compromised. Ryan Ebron farms in east central Nebraska and says corn came through pollination in good shape, but now both corn and soybeans are under severe stress.
We haven't had rain now for quite some time. If we have, it's been very spotty where we've gotten it. The heat keeps rising around here. I mean, this week we're close to 100 pretty much every day. So crops are really stressing now. The dryland acres are really taking a beating.
And irrigated corn is taking nearly 1/3 of an inch of water daily. So the weather is trimming yields, especially off the record levels in 2021.
I know that the top end yield that we were shooting for, we probably won't reach now. A full week of no rain and temperatures at 100 or 100 plus, that's going to take it 20% at least.
Last year he had 83 bushel beans, but this year will be well below that unless the weather turns in August.
On the bean side of things, I'd say if we don't get any rain in August, there's going to be at least a 50 to 60% hit, if not a almost total loss on some of it.
I think that this is one place where, again, it's not just about Ukraine now. It's a humanitarian disaster that will be facing not just the region, not just Europe, but frankly the whole world within 6 months.
Well, Katie, Joe Biden's Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo, she says the administration could soon relax tariffs on Chinese goods to combat soaring inflation here at home. Should we be doing this right now? Does it send the right message to China?
It doesn't send the right message. It tells them, go ahead and take advantage of us. But it also isn't going to solve inflation. The only thing that's going to really take a dent out of inflation is if President Biden lifts or pauses or halts his war against American fossil fuels. That's what's driving inflation. It's gasoline prices. It's diesel oil prices. It's the fact that petroleum is used in everything from cosmetics to clothing. Stop that war on fossil fuels, on American fossil fuels. You'll fix inflation so fast, but yet they won't do it.
In California. Now, the California Farm Bureau reports that farmers and ranchers are suffering impacts as populations of the destructive bugs surge in several western states. Now, the challenge is worsening amid continued drought. In rural Modoc County, ag officials say grasshopper damage has affected up to 500,000 acres and has been particularly devastating on hay crops there.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Jean Vaccarino has turned to food banks after months of choosing between groceries and her heart medicine.
I will probably be homeless by next year because of the rent has tripled.
She says she's been living on disability for the past few years, making it harder to make ends meet.
I can't buy clothes. I can't buy for my grandchildren. You can't buy anything. You know, it's day to day, and you just hope and pray for the best.
With rising inflation, the average American is spending nearly $500 more per month, including $78 more on food, toughest for those living paycheck to paycheck. In a June poll, 60% of lower-income households said grocery prices were a major problem. So millions are turning to food banks for help. Some pantries say they're serving 50% more people than a year ago. Long lines in Phoenix mirror the worst days of the pandemic. In San Antonio, 1/3 of these people are here for the first time.
These are families that are working, but they are just not making enough to put food on the table at the end of the day.
Bill Murphy is picking up meals for veterans.
It'll mean survival, bottom line.
Demand is skyrocketing as the government scales back COVID assistance programs and donations from the USDA and grocery stores plummet, stretching food banks to the brink.
They don't have surplus, well, then it cuts our supply.
In Ohio, warehouses are drained. They say it's the worst shortage in years, and pantries are rationing food to stay afloat. Few banks can afford to buy supply to fill the gap, and even that is getting far pricier.
America is transitioning from a pandemic crisis to a hunger crisis. The worst case scenario is that food banks will have to continue to wind down and even shut down food distributions that are vital lifelines for communities across this country.
Agronomist Bruce Battles says with the late planting, the crop is behind, so it's a critical week for the physiological stage of row crops.
It seems like in general the crop's not caught up with where we normally would be in a lot of those cases, and I think some of that's even pushing like keep grain fill and even some late pollination type of things into some of the heat events we're having now, right?
And 90% of Nebraska is in some level of drought, which is a challenge even with the large amount of irrigation.
The bigger factor right now is we're going into a period where we could have tip back, and kernel depth is could be fairly shallow in area, and to your point, knock off some bushels.
Add to that several storm systems that caused replanting, making it a challenging year for Nebraska farmers.